DMZ to Pyongyang to see the New York Philharmonic, you know that consistently Spencer Kim was the motivating force behind those kinds of events. Cancel. Okay. I'm told that our Russian participant, unfortunately, is not going to be able to make it. So we'll start with Spencer Kim giving a broad view of where the world stands as we come out of this financial crisis. I think it's probably best for each of us to speak from the podium.
Good morning. Well, after we just had a great speech by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, I'm not sure what you guys can expect, but we'll do our very best. What I am about to share with you today is not a conventional wisdom. And so, although I am giving you the American perspective of this is really my personal opinions only. I have 3 points to make today. One, a brief comment on how we got into the current economic mess. That's, of course, my version. I expect others will give more detailed and expert views later. Second, my analysis of the underlying and fundamental cause of the world's current financial slowdown with the conclusion that we are in a changed world, but one that is really just returning to the normalcy. And third, I will share some thoughts on where we go from here, what we as entrepreneurs and business persons should be looking for. I will give you a hint. I'll talk quite a bit about small business, or known as SMEs, that will provide almost all of the vitalities in the future economic of the regions. So let me begin my first thought. My basic comment on the current economic situation is that it required many, many people to suspend their common sense to get where we are. It wasn't just by the greed of few. I think all of us. The old saying that goes, if it is too good to be true, it probably isn't true, applies here in this case. Was it really possible to have trade imbalances and current account deficit go on forever? I think we should ask that in a common sense basis. Was it really possible to make loans to people that who we all knew wouldn't be able to pay back, and then package this in so-called financial product, and somehow the risk will be passed on to somebody else? It seemed to me that the words replaced the common thought process. We had economic paradigm shift, we used to say. We had a new economy, we used to say. We even said end of history as we knew. And best of all, we had credit default swap that somehow passed the risk of debt through many people's hands under the illusion that somehow that made the risk go away. Oops, it's still there. Many were suspicious, and there were many distant voices that predicted trouble, but the majority did not listen because many had some nagging doubt but kept silent because they were all benefiting from this false boom. But my analysis of the fundamental cause of this situation today is not based on the just immediate past, let's say 2008, or even go back to the Asia original crisis of 97. At its most basic, it is my contention that it is not a bubble that caused our trouble, but a gigantic 63-year-old vacuum that the world faced after the Second World War. The destruction of the war of the Second World War caused a huge global economic and political vacuum. It sucked the United States into that vacuum, and the U.S. became the superpower because most of the Europe and Asia were destroyed and exhausted from the war. Central planning in Russia and China prevented serious economic development in those giants and prolonged the vacuum. This vacuum magnified the U.S. power much more so than the index of GDP will suggest, or the population base will suggest. The open system in U.S., oftentimes as a foreign policy measures to help the others, invited many countries to adopt an export-led growth model and aimed at the U.S. market and coupled with protectionism at their homes. Actually, the changes after 1990 began a restoring the natural equilibrium, but we didn't notice that. The dollar as the world reserve currency and the preeminent role of the U.S. financial service industries recycled the global dollars to consumers and extended the effects of the vacuum again. It is irony that at the end of World War II, President Truman and his wise men built who grew up in the multi-polar world, saw the world in those terms, and created the global institution, the United Nations, World Bank, IMF, to name few, to regulate a multipolar world that they had hoped that will start after the post-World War II. But the real world, because of the vacuum, was politically and militarily bipolar with the United States and Soviet Union, and economically unipolar, U.S. taking the economic power. People all over the world, or all of us here, grew up knowing only that relationship as it is. In the world that we have hard time seeing the power of U.S. anomaly that resulted from a vacuum, but because it has been this way in our entire life, no one noticed it. Or in fact, I don't think we noticed that even today. When looked at this way, maybe the current economic situation was inevitable. I don't mean to say U.S. is in decline or that there is some moral decay in United States. I still see every day the vitality of U.S. economy and its people. However, the U.S. economy is not in decline. It is the rest of the world that is growing fast and catching up to us, and just helping to restore the equilibrium that was lost after the war, during and after the war. So I suggest that U.S. influence from now on will be close to our real metrics of 23% of world GDP and say 4.5% of the world population. And that's what I think we really should be looking at in a realistic way. Finally, I would like to draw some conclusion. First, if you're basing your business plan on the world somehow restoring itself to the pre-2008 status quo, I suggest you forget about it. Don't wait for the U.S. to return to its role as the global buyer. Much of U.S. vitality will depend on the ending its trade and current account deficit. Second, encourage your own government to do what they have to do in their view to create a solid base for growth, diversify, develop domestic market, and allow imports and create social safety net for your society. Third, don't suspend common sense like we did in the past. Build business plan on the sober basis, on reality, with a full consideration of debt and its risk associated with it. And the fourth and the most importantly, as an entrepreneur and as an investor, in this new environment, we need to look at the small and medium enterprises. In a changed world, it is the entrepreneurs who will find the new opportunities, and big business will be wasting a lot of their time looking back what went wrong. People with an entrepreneurial skill and tendency are the first one in a downturn to be let go because they don't cut the corporate mold. And now those people are freed from their employment. They can now begin to use their creative juice. In the U.S., over the last 15 years, small business has generated almost 60 to 80% of all the job generation. Let me give you an example. During the 91, right after the 1991 crisis, or I shouldn't say crisis, recession, it took 92 and 93 to recover from the recession. And during the 1991, U.S. lost 1.2 million jobs. And it took 92 to 93 to add approximately 2.6 million jobs, during which time the large corporations lost another 200,000 jobs. In the most recently, 2001, U.S. lost 2.6 million jobs, and of that, 2.2 million jobs were from large corporations. In following 2 years, 2002 and 2003 recovery, small business added 5 million jobs, while the large corporation again lost another 500,000 jobs. Of course, this is an American experience, and your situation may be different in other parts. But I think the same pattern will apply throughout the region if we can foster the environment in which the entrepreneur can bloom. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Spencer. I'm happy to say that I'm now told that our Russian speaker, Mr. Deripaska, is expected to arrive, and he'll be the last speaker, but his plane is going to get him here on time. At least that's the theory. Our next speaker will be Mr. Watanabe. He is the managing director of Japan's Institute for International Monetary Affairs. Beyond that, he's been one of the great men of Japanese banking. He's held titles like director and senior managing director and chief risk manager within the Mitsubishi banking group. So he's one of the most experienced and wise bankers from Japan. And he's going to put the East Asian situation in perspective in the way that Spencer put the American situation in perspective. Mr. Watanabe.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Can we get some technical assistance with the...
Seems... Not this one. Pen? No, not this is not mine. Okay, so I'd like to touch upon 3 topics. coming. First one is current issues arising from the recent financial crisis. And second one, long and medium-term issues by the structural changes in East Asia. The third one is East Asia's strategic responses and consequent business opportunities. Let me begin with first topics. The recession has generated significant reactions against globalization. Protectionist sentiment are spreading. So far, no one has objection that East Asia has greatly benefited from free and open trade and investment. Poverty has been lifted because of global economic growth through open policy. Before London Summit, as a member of APEC Business Advisory Council, we, ABAC people, private sector representative, presented and asked to the APEC leaders to have a strong and definite stand against protectionism, including even WTO compliant measures if it is protectionist sentiment, and asked their support to make a free trade and investment, namely promoting WTO or DDA conclusion by early next year. In financial crisis, as Spencer Kim mentioned, excessive greed, excessive leverage, and excessive liquidity, shadow banking, and regulatory loopholes are among causes. Policymakers have reacted to enhance the regulation. However, in East Asia, financial deregulation and innovation are still in infancy to be promoted further. They say Basel Committee discussing to strengthen bank capital adequacy requirement. We need to pay special attention to side effects of new capital regulations on banks in this fragile economic situation. Due to the regulation, the banks may be forced to cut lending. Economic recovery may be thus hard. I think intensive dialogue between regulator and private sector banks, including Asian banks, are requested. Now, as Prime Minister Howard mentions, world economy is shifting its gravity center toward Asia from the West. Economic growth is an agenda. Asia is expected to be a new growth engine. For Asia, taking up this new role, the further development of its capital and currency market has become an urgent task to provide efficient financial intermediation facilitating the region's growth. I believe that the time has to come to seriously consider Asian nations working towards a very long-term goal of having an Asian global currency or currencies to support the growth as a community. I'd like now to touch on second topics, the long and medium-term issues by structural changes in East Asia. Reports by United States nations United Nations World Population Prospect predict East Asia's rapidly aging society. In East Asia, notably Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong and Thailand, already have an aging society. Japan's population has started declining. China is also faced with an aging society, albeit a population growth. The shape of population distribution pyramid is now rapidly changing to bell shape or pyramid of upside down. The economic growth and savings of East Asia have been determined largely by its population distribution. However, as society ages, the burden of social security will increase and the excess savings will decrease over the medium and long term. Japan is the preceding example of that. The third topic is the East Asia's strategic responses and business opportunities from that change. The United States will remain a young and vibrant economy. However, the crisis has damaged the balance sheet of U.S. households and financial institutions, limiting banks' lending ability. U.S. households seem to be inclined to save money. Their quick recovery of consumption seems remote. In other words, U.S. may not be a source of Asia's export-driven economic growth for the time to come. Now it is Asia's turn to contribute to the world economy. We need to establish new definition of Asia's growth and its strategy. Prime Minister of Japan has made an issue that Asia's double income growth. Key concepts of growth, as Korean leader mentioned, green growth, and my view is inclusive growth or shared growth. For inclusive growth, financial inclusion, which providing financial access to entrepreneurs is a key area. Small medium enterprise finance, microcredit, micro-remittance, micro-insurance, among others, will help to broaden the base for economic growth. Today, SME, microenterprise will benefit large segment of population, as Spencer Kim mentioned. Building urban and industrial infrastructure will also promote growth, viewing the rapid and burst urbanization and lapse of industrial infrastructure in Asia. Asian nations' cooperation to build a deep, strong, and integral financial market will be a key supporting its sustained economic growth. The aging of the population will require solid social security system in East Asia. Some form of funded pension or subject to taxation mechanism should be constructed. Best practice of Korea, Japan, should be shared with Asian emerging economies. The growth of pension funds will bring deep and strong capital market, together with consumption relieved from future uneasiness. An aging society could be a source of new business opportunities, for example, in fund management, insurance, nursing care, and education industries, and so on. In aging society, we need human resources of high individual productivity. As KDI's president mentioned, higher education level and wider availability of lifelong educational opportunities will become essential. Education has been a key driver of economic development in Japan. It is strongly recommended that East Asian governments continue to enhance their conventional educational system. This concludes my comments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Watanabe-san. Now we're going to have two Korean business leaders speak. The first is Mr. Hyun, the chairman of Tongyang Group. The foundation of Tongyang Group's business is cement, but it has become a leading financial services firm, also a conglomerate in other areas. It's become the dominant firm in the Korean bond market and a leading firm in insurance at a time when the American experience shows that that can be a very dangerous place to be. But the experience of Tongyang has been that if you don't let animal spirits get out of control when the market is going up, and you don't completely panic when the market is going down, you can build a very solid, successful, rapidly growing business right through the cycle. Mr. Hyun.
Thank you, Dr. Overholt. Good morning. My presentation today is about comparison between Asian financial crisis in 1997 and current global financial crisis, and also will cover on what my company did as an example regarding responsibilities and roles financial institutions can play during the time of the crisis. And also I'll touch upon some lessons from the crisis and some suggestions for the future. During the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Korea experienced an unprecedented economic downturn which led to a sharp devaluation of Korean assets. Korea did recover from the downturn relatively quickly thanks to an improvement in export numbers and extraordinary efforts by the Korean people, such as the nationwide gold collection campaign. The relationship between Korea and foreign institutions during that time could be compared to that of the grieving family and the funeral director or undertaker at a funeral. A grieving relative with very limited experience in making funeral arrangements is in a vulnerable state. This puts him at a great disadvantage when negotiating with a funeral director. Similarly, Korea was in a vulnerable state of mind as the 1997 crisis unfolded. Our country was left with very limited options and had to accept various measures laid out by the IMF and other foreign consulting or investment banking firms. Today, Korea is in a very different position. The present situation is diametrically different from the Asian financial crisis. The United States and Europe could be regarded as the grieving relatives, as they are at the heart of the current crisis, whereas Asian countries, including Korea, can perform the role of the funeral director in helping the global economy overcome the current crisis. To be more specific, Asia must provide a leadership role. One Asia is a crucial concept that each and every Asian country should pursue, and to this end, we must strengthen financial stability and increase economic cooperation among ourselves. I believe that the current crisis has provided new opportunities for Asian countries and corporations to expand their existing operations. Let us take a look at the current recent history of Dongyang Securities as an example. Dongyang Securities is a top underwriter of the domestic bond market. Our sales of debt-related papers are more than 5 times that of our closest competitor. We were able to secure this top position in the Korean debt market after a credit crisis in the financial market in 2004 that involved some of the largest corporations in Korea. While most financial institutions were reluctant to underwrite in firms with lower credit ratings, Dongyang Securities took the extra steps of analyzing their financial conditions, conducting due diligence, and convincing investors to invest in some of the neglected firms. As a result, Dongyang Securities was able to seize opportunities for its investors while providing the issuing company with the liquidity it needed. In other words, our firm was able to carry out the responsibilities and roles of an investment bank by intermediating the flow of funds between capital seekers and capital providers. The current financial crisis should be dealt with using a similar approach. Financial institutions should take the initiative to analyze financial conditions and conduct due diligence of potential issuers rather than simply relying on the reports of credit rating agencies. While financial institutions should manage the overall risks they are now taking, locating competitive firms that are seeking capital and connecting them with investors would be a more responsive way to revitalize the global economy. Financial institutions, especially in East Asia, should take advantage of this opportunity and should provide funds to some US and European companies which are currently suffering from lack of liquidity. We must play the role of funeral director and provide Asian investors with opportunities to deploy their capital. One of the more important lessons from the current financial crisis is that risk should be fully managed. As subprime mortgages cater to those households with lower credit ratings, it is obvious that they are risky investments. It was theoretically plausible that pooling these assets and issuing residential mortgage-backed securities could disperse risk. However, as these risky assets are combined to create collateralized debt obligations and recombined to form the second generation of CDOs, the nature of the risk of these derivative products became much too complicated. The role of CEOs in thorough risk management is crucial, especially because of constant and rapid change in the business environment. The CEOs of financial institutions should have understood that excessive money invested in the property market could lead to a bubble and that loans to people with lower credit scores might cause high delinquencies and default rates. They should have paid close attention to risk management based on lessons from the other bubbles